This is session 1 of what I'm calling God's preparation. Now, when a baby's expected, there's lots of preparation. Nursery gets painted, a new crib gets bought, grandmas get knitting and sewing, and there's all sorts of preparations, even some partners doing dummy runs to the hospital just to see how long it takes. God's Son was born into the world, and it would appear that God hadn't really given it a lot of thought or preparation. After all, it was very awkward for Joseph and Mary. They were away from home, and they couldn't even find a place to stay, and they ended up in an animal shelter. Surely God could have planned things a bit better than that. But the scope of God's planning for the birth of Jesus is just amazing. Nothing was left unplanned. God didn't suddenly think, oh, I better send Jesus into the world. It's all been carefully prepared for. It began when he took Abraham out of his land of Ur and took him away from his family and took him to Canaan, which is the land that eventually the people would settle in. And Abraham was to establish through his family the nation of Israel, and he was to learn about who God was. God then took them down to Egypt. Now, they were there for about 400 years and they ended up in slavery. But in Egypt, they were living amongst a group of people who believed in many gods, and they could see that their God was very different. Then he showed his power by taking them out of Egypt in an amazing way. He led them through the desert where he taught them about who he was, how he would provide for all their needs, how he guided them, and eventually took them to this promised land, again showing that he was God by enabling this band of people to conquer all that land. Where did he put them? Well, he didn't put them in some remote corner. He put them right in the middle of all the large nations of the time, so that all trade between those big nations had to go through Israel. So even though they were a very small nation, everybody knew about them. Then came the exile, and they were shipped off to large parts of Babylon. Far from being a failure, this was part of God's plan. While many of them did return to Jerusalem later on, probably more of them actually stayed where they were, scattered right through the Persian Empire. We see this in the book of Esther. Haman was someone who wanted to get rid of the Jews because he'd been offended by the Jewish Mordecai. So he said to the king, "There is a certain people in all the provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all other people." Now, Haman's plan did backfire on him, but that's not the point. It was obvious that there were Jews living right throughout Persia and that people saw them as different. One of the main differences, of course, was their worship of one God, and the fact that they refused to bow to the king. They would only bow to their God. It had a profound effect on the people. They worshipped many gods, but today most of Arabia is worshipping one God. Now, the God that they worship is not perhaps correct, but there is that one God, that focus on the one God, and they say what all the Jews used to say, our God is one. So God had established, through spreading the Jewish people through that land, had established the fact that there is only one God. And so when people came to hear the news of Jesus, they couldn't simply say, oh, he's another God alongside all of ours. They had to have the notion of one God if they were to really understand who Jesus was.
We believe in God the Father, Almighty Lord of light, Creator of the heavens, the earth, the sea, the sky. so